Everyone was waiting to see if the herbal remedy Kevin had made from the plants that he'd spotted down by the river would help to save Miranda's life. Officer Emmett pulled Kevin aside and asked him, "Did you make that herbal pill you gave me yourself? And also the one you gave to my fiancé?" "Well, you never asked," Kevin replied as he shrugged his shoulders. Officer Emmett didn't know what to say when she heard his answer. Time passed by slowly as they all waited to see if Miranda would show any improvement. About a half an hour later, she started to look a little more normal, but she still hadn't opened her eyes. "Kevin, what's going on?" Dalton asked anxiously. "Don't worry. She's doing fine. I think she'll pull out of this in about 10 minutes, Kevin said confidently. "Okay, then let's wait a little longer," Dalton said as he nodded his head. "Don't believe this bum, my friend. I'm sure the concoction he made isn't doing anything at all," Blair said to Dalton. "And you're saying this based on your vast knowledge of herbal remedies?" Dalton shot back as he glared at him. Blair didn't dare to say anything else. Jason interrupted to say to Kevin, "I still think you're a troublemaker. Why the hell did you have us burn our clothes when the chefs had set up a perfectly good grill?" Kevin looked at him and shook his head. "That shows what little you know, Jason. The grill's charcoal would have put a lot of toxic substances on the roots I was preparing. But your fancy clothes were made of 100% cotton, a lot cleaner to burn." This seemed to satisfy the onlookers, and Jason backed off so he wouldn't look even more foolish. He'd get even with Kevin later. While they were waiting, the sky suddenly turned dark, and a cool breeze blew across the campsite, making the trees start to sway back and forth. "It looks like it's going to rain," Officer Emmett said. "No way. Even if we get some rain, it shouldn't be a thunderstorm. After all, it's almost autumn," Matilda Jones pointed out as she looked up at the sky. "I wouldn't be so sure of that," Kevin said very seriously. "It's still pretty warm out. I think we should move to higher ground so we can be safe from any flooding." "Sherwin, do you have any people to help move the campsite?" Dalton asked very soberly. "Don't worry, Dalton. The tents are perfectly fine right here," Blair said very assuredly. Right at that moment, Kevin looked up at the sky and frowned. "Kevin, what's wrong?" Phoebe asked inquisitively. "I can't believe they set up our tent so close to the river," Kevin said loudly. "Once it starts raining, the river will overflow its banks, and everything will be washed downstream, including us. And we don't have much time." "Kevin, you have no idea what you're talking about," Blair rebuked him. "It's too late in the season for that to happen." Dalton ignored Blair and asked Kevin, "Are you sure about that? Do you know about meteorology too?" "I know a little about it. You should really move Miranda to higher ground while she recuperates. I'll get Lily to do the same." Then Kevin turned around and looked at Blair. "Do you have any extra tents? I need one of them." Seeing how serious Kevin looked, a lot of the campers started to whisper to each other. They couldn't believe he was showing off again. After all, there were never any serious thunderstorms this late in the season. Lily heard the comments from everyone and started to doubt Kevin once again. Then Dalton looked Kevin in the eyes and thought for a moment. He agreed that it was getting too late in the year to have a summer thunderstorm, but Kevin had already been right twice today, so he gave him the benefit of the doubt. "Give Kevin a tent," Dalton said coldly. He didn't have to bother being polite to Blair. Kevin looked up at the sky again and commented, "I think we've got about 20 minutes before the storm gets here. Unfortunately, nobody can get a strong enough signal to check a weather app. I'm guessing we'll just have enough time to get to higher ground and set up shelter. Does anyone want to go with us?" "All right, Kevin, stop messing around," Lily warned him. "Are you coming with me or not?" Kevin didn't have time to explain it all to Lily. He turned around and asked again, "Isn't anyone else coming along?" Kevin didn't really like these people, but their lives were at stake. He waited, but nobody answered him. They just stared at him like he was full of crap. "Kevin, that's enough," Lily pleaded with him helplessly. From Lily's point of view, Kevin was taking advantage of their relationship. but just the thought of this made her feel embarrassed and she started to blush a little. "Lily, you have to trust me. There isn't much time left." Kevin looked at Lily and was confused to see her blushing. The rest of the group didn't believe Kevin knew anything about the weather and figured his luck had to run out soon. They didn't see any need to follow him and pitch their tents in another spot. While they were all discussing amongst themselves, Phoebe walked up with her brother Blake. "Kevin, I believe you. I'll go up the hill with you," Phoebe said confidently. "What are you talking about, sis?" Blake said somewhat anxiously. "It's way too dangerous in those woods." A few other members of her family agreed and tried to persuade her to stay where they were, but Phoebe didn't pay any attention to them. She just stared at Kevin with a determined look in her eyes. She didn't care whether Kevin would make a big deal out of it or not. What was important was that she had to support him right now. The group tried to warn her not to go with him. One of them even said, "Just because he lucked out and made some herbal drink doesn't mean he knows what he's talking about. Stay here where it's safe." They all tried to stop her from going. Blair walked quickly up to Kevin and said loudly, "I know why you're doing this, Kevin. You know that your herbal cure isn't going to help Miranda. So now you're trying to sneak out of here before Dalton figures it out and gets his hands on you." A lot of the other campers nodded in agreement, and this really made Kevin angry. Here he was trying to help these people, but they kept mocking him and calling him names. Were they ever going to listen to his advice without complaining? "Get out of my way," Kevin said coldly. "What? Am I right? So now you're angry because you know I'm telling the truth," Blair said with a proud smile. He knew that he couldn't let Kevin leave. By now, everyone was convinced that Blair was right and that Kevin was trying to run away. They just couldn't figure out why he'd asked Dalton to bring his wife along with him. But they tried to keep him from leaving anyway. "I said, get out of the way. I don't have the time to waste with you here," Kevin said quickly. He had to set up the tent before the storm arrived, and he didn't want Lily, Miranda, and Phoebe to get soaked by the rainstorm that was on the way. "Okay, Kevin, now that I've exposed you for what you really are, why don't you go and apologize to Dalton? Admit that you were wrong," Blair said boastfully. "Blair, do you have your head on straight? If I wanted to run away, would I ask Dalton to come along with me?" Kevin's patience had reached its limit. Blair started to reply, but Kevin stopped him as he opened his mouth. "Just leave us alone. I don't want to have to come down here and save you later," Kevin said frankly. "What? What did you just say? The wind's blowing too hard. I didn't hear you clearly," Blair said sarcastically. "And by the way, I don't need help from someone like you." Kevin ignored Blair. Just as he was about to head towards the woods with his equipment, Blair put out his arm and stopped him. "Dalton, it looks like we'll need to deal with this guy first before we can head to higher ground," Kevin said grimly. "That's easy, Kevin," Dalton said. Then he turned to Blair and said very firmly, "Get the hell out of the way right now. I'll only tell you once." This scared the crap out of Blair, and he immediately stepped aside to let Kevin move past him. Kevin picked up 2 backpacks and 2 tents now that Dalton and his wife were joining them. Just as he was about to head towards the wood with Lily and the others, he suddenly turned around and looked at Blair and said to him, "Don't do me any more favors." "You son of a bitch!" Blair couldn't take it anymore. He balled up his fists and started to move toward Kevin, but Officer Emmett suddenly pulled him back. "Kelly, are you still standing up for this piece of trash?" Blair asked her in surprise. "I'm doing this for your own good. This camping trip was organized by your family. If you were to fight with Kevin," she paused for a moment and said, "are you really willing to let everyone see your family as some kind of a joke?" Officer Emmett was obviously disappointed in Sherwin. Although she wanted to leave with Kevin and his group, she decided to stay because she also thought that there wasn't much chance of a big storm this time of year. "Dalton, let's get going now. The rain will start very soon and we won't have much time to set up our tents," Kevin said very seriously. "Okay, Please ask Lily to take care of my wife while we set up the tents together, Dalton replied. The land in that part of Illinois was fairly flat, but luckily, there were rolling hills near there and the river was in a very slight valley that extended up into the woods. After about 10 minutes, Kevin found a good place to set up the new campsite. With Dalton's help and the simple tents that they'd brought along, the two of them were able to set it up very quickly. Suddenly, Lily said loudly, "Kevin, Dalton, come here. Miranda just woke up." When Dalton heard her, he immediately abandoned Kevin, who was cutting down some vines, and ran to Miranda. "Dalton, what happened to me?" Miranda said weakly. "It was all my fault. That fruit I gave you was poisonous. Luckily, Kevin saved you," Dalton said nervously as he hugged Miranda tightly. Watching the tender scene between the two of them, Lily subconsciously shifted her gaze to Kevin. Kevin was now gathering the vines together, and it looked like he was getting ready to use them for something. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning streaked across the sky, followed by rumbling thunder and a wild gust of wind. "Did I just see lightning? I can't believe we're stuck in the woods during a thunderstorm," Phoebe said in a panic. "Damn it, Kevin, you were right," Dalton shouted as he used his body to protect Miranda from the wind. "Don't thank me yet. Go ahead and take your wife into the smaller tent. I'll join Lily and Phoebe in the other one," Kevin said as he used the vines to tie the tents more tightly to the stakes. Soon the five of them split into two groups and went into their respective tents. But when Kevin entered the tent with Lily and Phoebe, the atmosphere immediately got very awkward. "Kevin, why did you only bring 2 tents for the 5 of us?" Lily asked as she started to blush. "Lily, I only have 2 hands. How many tents and backpacks do you want me to carry?" Kevin protested. Lily couldn't think of what to say. She just knew it felt really inappropriate for the 3 of them to share a tent. Suddenly there was another flash of lightning and a loud thunderclap. It really gave Lily and Phoebe a scare. "Looks like this rainstorm is even worse than I expected," Kevin said with a frown. "By the way, Kevin, I'm curious. How did you know it was going to rain?" Phoebe asked him after she came back to her senses. "Would you believe me if I told you that I also know astronomy and geography?" Kevin joked. Lily and Phoebe just rolled their eyes at him. The tent immediately fell into an awkward silence. The 3 of them didn't know what to say and just sat quietly listening to the sound of the rain outside. "Why don't the 2 of you chat a little? I need some rest," Kevin said as he yawned and stretched out on the sleeping mat. "Kevin, you don't plan to sleep in here, do you?" Lily asked awkwardly. "Well, you don't expect me to go out there, do you?" Kevin asked in surprise. "Are you sure? You'd really let me go out to get drenched in this downpour?" "This isn't about the rain. It's because Phoebe is one of the most eligible young women in Chicago, and she's never had a boyfriend. If you sleep in the same tent as us, people will find out, and it would ruin her reputation," Lily explained. It was very difficult for her to say this in front of Phoebe, but that's what she felt. How were they going to work this out?
While most of the families decided to weather the storm at the campsite by the river, Kevin and Dalton took Lily, Phoebe, and Miranda to higher ground in the woods. But once the storm began and Kevin went into their tent, Lily didn't think it was appropriate for him to be in there with Phoebe. "What's the problem? We're not on a date, it's a tent. Do you want me to go out there and get soaked, or should I throw Dalton and Miranda out of their tent?" Kevin complained. He really didn't understand what Lily was thinking. How could she be worried about Phoebe's reputation instead of thinking about her own husband's comfort? "That's okay, Lily. It's such a heavy rain and it really wouldn't be safe for Kevin to go outside," Phoebe said quietly. Plus, she really didn't find the idea of staying in the tent with Kevin all that unpleasant. "See, Lily, Phoebe doesn't mind," Kevin said with a smile. Lily was at a loss for words. She just rolled her eyes at Kevin. This whole situation really made her feel uneasy. After that, the 3 of them lay down quietly and waited for the storm to pass. After an hour, the thunderstorm still didn't show any sign of letting up. Suddenly, Kevin remembered something and leaned over. Kevin, what's going on? Lily, who wasn't able to sleep at all, asked him cautiously. Did you guys hear something? Kevin asked in alarm. Phoebe listened carefully and understood right away. It sounds like someone is calling for help. Not good, Kevin replied as he quickly opened the tent zipper. Lily and Phoebe heard Kevin complain as soon as he stepped outside. Damn, it's pouring. The rain was certainly very heavy and Kevin could barely see where he was going. He called out to the other tent, Dalton, are you asleep? If you're awake, follow me down the hill. I think the rest of our group's in trouble. Suddenly there was another loud thunderclap. It sounded like the sky was being ripped apart. Kevin? Nope, I'm not asleep yet, Dalton said as he quickly came out of his tent. Kevin called out to the women in both tents. You three should stay up here. Whatever you do, don't go down to the river. It took more than 10 minutes for Kevin and Dalton to find their way down to the main campsite. They were stunned by what they saw. The river had risen at least 6 feet. Not only did it wash away the tents, but there were also some trees that had fallen, forming a natural dam. The rest of the group was treading water and holding tightly to the trees in bushes by the shore. They were trying desperately not to be washed away by the water. Fortunately, they had all had swimming lessons in their fancy pool, so they were safe for the moment. But they couldn't hold on much longer. Kevin, you really should go into business as a fortune teller, Dalton said as he gave his friend an admiring look. We can talk about that later. For now, let's find a way to get them all up here, Kevin said very seriously. He looked around and found 2 long vines that must have been 5 inches in diameter. Kevin stood next to a tree and threw the vines down to them. Hey, can you hear me? He yelled down at them. I just threw you some vines. Pull yourselves up with all your strength. When they heard this, they all looked up at Kevin. Some of them suddenly remembered what Kevin had said earlier. He really wasn't looking for an excuse to leave. Some even regretted not listening to Kevin's warning. Mr. Williams, pull me up first. I'm too young to die, one of them yelled out. Get me out of here. I promise I won't laugh at you anymore, another one called to him. They all started shouting frantically. Then another tree fell into the water and there was a loud scream. They were frightened out of their wits. Kevin and Dalton looked at each other and couldn't help shaking their heads. Sure. Now they were being nice to Kevin. Stop arguing and help each other climb up here. Ladies first, Kevin shouted to them. Then he saw Officer Emmett in the crowd and called out to her. Why are you still waiting? Get up here. Officer Emmett was surprised when she heard this. She didn't expect that the first person Kevin saved would be her. But the vine had gotten very slippery from all the rain. It took Officer Emmett a long time to climb to safety. Just as she was about to lose her grip, Kevin reached out and grabbed her arm. Then he managed to get his other arm around her waist and helped her to the clearing. He'd saved her life. Seeing this, Blair, who was still in the water, suddenly shouted, What are you doing, you son of a bitch? Watch where you put your hands. When Officer Emmett heard this, she got very angry with her fiancé. What are you talking about, Sherwin? Just for that, you'll be the last one out, Kevin yelled. With Dalton's help, Kevin quickly pulled everyone to safety, except for Blair. Kevin was still feeling the effects of his fight with the cougar earlier in the day, and he felt waves of pain when his wounds reopened from all his effort. Everyone, go up to the small clearing where we pitched our tents, and don't worry about the wild animals. They're smarter than some of us and have already found shelter, Kevin said while struggling to catch his breath. Then Kevin turned to Dalton and said, Would you please lead the way? I'm sure they'd rather listen to you than to me. Okay, no problem, Dalton replied. In fact, even without Dalton leading the way, everyone would have listened to Kevin at this point. They may have learned from their mistake. Kevin took a moment to catch his breath and wait for the pain to subside. Then he heard Blair yelling to him, Kevin, what are you doing? Don't you see that I'm still down here? Hurry up and save me. I'm sorry, Mr. Blair. After saving so many people, I don't have much strength left, Kevin shouted back. Stop stalling. You're just trying to get even with me, you son of a bitch, Blair shouted. Just then, another tree suddenly fell into the river. It was less than 6 feet away from Blair. This frightened him enough to make him see how much he needed Kevin's help, and he shouted, "Kevin, please save me. I don't want to die. Kevin, I know everything that Blair's done to you, but please save him for my sake," Officer Emmett pleaded with him. Kevin stopped what he was doing and just stared at Officer Emmett. He realized that he didn't really have any intention of saving Blair. He was so tired of this arrogant bastard fighting with him and insulting him every time he tried to help him. He was the worst combination of arrogant and powerful. If he rescued Blair, Kevin was sure he'd still have trouble with him in the future. "Maybe I'll save him, but you have to say the magic word. Please," Kevin said very seriously. Immediately a smile appeared on Officer Emmett's face. She knew very well that Kevin was giving her a chance. "Please," Officer Emmett said shyly. "I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you," Kevin said with a grin. "Please, I beg you. Please save Sherwin as soon as you can," Officer Emmett replied. Blair, who was still treading water while he hung onto a branch, looked desperate. Kevin suddenly turned around and shouted down the slope to Blair, "Do you remember what you said to me?" "Kevin, that's enough," Blair screamed. "Since you've forgotten what you said, maybe you don't need my help after all," Kevin shouted to him. Then another branch suddenly fell next to Blair, scaring him so much that he almost lost his grip. "Kevin, please, I'm begging you to save me. I really don't want to die," he sobbed. He realized that he needed Kevin's help right now. He could get revenge on him later, once he was safe. "Are you sure you want to come up here in the woods?" Kevin shouted down to Blair. "You know there might be cougars here," Kevin taunted him. "Yes, I admit it. I arranged for someone to dress up in a cougar costume. Now please save me. I'm too young to die." Blair sounded like he was about to cry. "A fake cougar? It can't be. How could you do such a thing?" Kevin asked him. I wanted to look like a hero in front of Kelly, so I found someone to pretend to be a wild animal," Blair shouted back. Officer Emmett froze when she heard him say this. "Do you still want me to save him?" Kevin turned his head and asked Officer Emmett. She didn't answer Kevin's question. She just quietly turned around and walked away. "Consider yourself lucky," Kevin said as he threw the vine down to Blair. After he had climbed up the slope to safety, Blair saw Officer Emmett walking away. He didn't even say thank you to Kevin before chasing after her. When Kevin returned to the camp, Lily immediately jumped out of the tent. "Kevin, did you save them?" Lily said in disbelief. "Not all of them. Dalton also helped," Kevin said casually. "Kevin, I'm so proud of you," Lily said happily. Lily had already asked Dalton about the rescue when he came back to the tent leading the group. When she found out that it was Kevin who had saved everyone, Lily was stunned. As she thought about everything that had happened today, she simply couldn't believe that everyone still despised her husband and called him a loser. "It's still raining hard, and it's kind of chilly," Kevin said to Lily. "Why don't you go into the tent and rest?" Kevin ignored all of the people huddling under the bushes and headed back down the hill. Miranda had been poisoned by the golden fruit that Dalton had picked by mistake. Kevin knew that this kind of fruit was very rare, especially this far north. He didn't want any of them to be damaged by the floodwaters. When Kevin got down near the river, he looked around and finally found 2 trees that still had some undamaged fruit. It looked like there were about 20 that had survived. The night passed very quickly. The next day, nobody was really in the mood to play, so Blair's family managed to get where there was cell phone coverage to call for some limos to come pick them up early. Kevin and Lily rode back with Dalton and Miranda and a few other guests. After a few minutes, Dalton asked him, "Kevin, tell me honestly, how do you make such good predictions? You're like a prophet or something." Miranda, who was doing a lot better now, also looked at Kevin with interest. "I wouldn't go that far," Kevin replied nonchalantly. I only read a few books about these subjects when I was bored. There were a couple of other people in the stretch limo and they started whispering to each other. Who does he think he is? He was just lucky. But because Dalton was in the car, they were careful not to say anything loudly enough for him to hear it. Suddenly, the driver slammed on the brakes, tossing the passengers around in their seats. They immediately started to complain to the driver. "Hey, where did you learn to drive?" And worse insults. "I'm very sorry about that, but there's a tree blocking the road," the driver said very apologetically. They all looked at where the driver was pointing, and sure enough, there was an enormous tree that had fallen across the road. There were also a few people standing in the road, scratching their heads and trying to figure out what to do. But Kevin thought to himself, something doesn't look right. As they were all leaving the campsite the next morning, the limo driver had to stop because a tree was blocking the road. When Kevin saw the people standing in the road looking at the downed tree, he had a bad feeling. Kevin suddenly said loudly, "We can't stay here. Turn around right away and find another way back to Chicago." His shouting immediately drew everyone's attention. There were a few passengers in the stretch limo other than Kevin's group and Dalton's. Of course, Sherwin Blair was riding with them too. As usual, they thought he was just showing off. One of them said, "What the hell are you shouting for? Who said you could give orders here, you jackass?" Kevin scowled when he heard what they were saying. Just then, the group of men in the road suddenly walked up to the stretch limo, and an anxious-looking man in his 30s asked them for help. "My uncle hurt his leg when the tree fell, and he needs to get to the hospital right away. Can you please help us?" Another man added, "We live nearby and we were on our way to work when the tree fell." Then one of the other men, who had a strange expression on his face, said, "The traffic's really tied up because of the storm. It'll take way too long for an ambulance to get here. My uncle just can't wait that long." "Don't listen to them. We need to get out of here right now," Kevin said very seriously. He immediately turned around and sneered at him. "You piece of trash! Don't you have any conscience? Can't you see that someone's been injured?" Jason took on a really pompous tone and said, "Kevin, just because you're a loser, it doesn't mean you can't give someone a hand. Driver, please listen to me. You have to turn around and get us out of here," Kevin repeated. The driver had no idea what to do. Everyone was telling him something different. Officer Emmett spoke up and ordered the driver, "Quick, open the door and let them in." "Don't open it," Kevin shouted anxiously. Now the driver was paralyzed, unsure which of them he should listen to. "Kevin, what are you doing?" Officer Emmett asked in confusion. She'd never known Kevin to be so cold and heartless. "Didn't you hear me? We need to leave," Kevin shouted again. He still hadn't explained why to Officer Emmett. Blair was very annoyed at Kevin and yelled, "Shut the hell up! Nobody wants to hear what you think." Then he shouted at the driver, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and open the door." Kevin sighed helplessly, but none of them listened to him. As it turns out, he realized as soon as he saw the line of fallen trees that they hadn't been knocked down by the storm. Someone had deliberately cut them down. Plus, when one of the men knocked down the window, Kevin clearly saw a tattoo on the man's arm, partially covered by a sleeve. He could tell right away that these guys were definitely not ordinary farmers. "But we don't have any empty seats," Jason pointed out to them. Without waiting for Blair to agree, Kevin interrupted them. "I'll gladly give up my seat for them. Lily, Dalton, Miranda, Phoebe, why don't you guys get out of the car with me?" "How about if you just get out all by yourself, Kevin? Once you're gone, we can all make some room to squeeze them in," Jason said with a sneer. He really didn't want Kevin to share the ride with him anyway. Kevin ignored Jason and asked Dalton, "Do you want to join me? You know, I think it's kind of stuffy in here anyway. Why don't we all go out for a walk?" Dalton replied indifferently. "Blair, have another car pick us up later." "Lily, are you coming along or not?" Kevin asked his wife. "Kevin, what do you mean by all this? Don't you think my car can fit a few more people? Blair said indignantly. In fact, Blair also wanted Kevin to get out of the limo. He still hadn't gotten over the embarrassment of yesterday's fiasco with the flood, but if Dalton got out of the car with Kevin, how would he look to everyone else? Lily was about to answer, but before she could say anything, Phoebe said, "Let's go, Kevin. I'll go with you." The moment she said this, the men in Blair's group were very unhappy. Why was she going along with Kevin, this worthless deadbeat, instead of staying with them? What kind of logic was that? But when Lily heard Phoebe volunteer so enthusiastically, she felt very uneasy. "I'll get out too," Lily finally said. Now Blair's group of friends was really disappointed. They continued to hurl insults at Kevin as he opened the door to get out. As they were stepping out of the limo, Kevin turned around and said to Blair and the others, "If you need any help later, don't come crawling to me." Blair shouted back, "Go on, get out of here. We're trying to help some people and you're just running away. Who needs you?" "Blair, I want another car here for us in an hour," Dalton said brusquely. "But Dalton, But before Blair could finish answering, Dalton got out of the car. By now, Dalton considered Kevin to be his brother. But how could he tolerate seeing these people mocking Kevin all the time? He held back, though, because his wife was there. Out of all the people who were taunting Kevin just now, Blair was the loudest. Dalton was tempted to make an example out of him. "I'm really ashamed that you're part of the Jones family, even though it's only by marriage. I can't believe you're not willing to help these men," Jason said with disdain. But Kevin didn't care what they thought. He just turned a deaf ear. It still amazed him that they kept insulting him, even though he'd done so many things to help them. After Kevin and the others got out of the limo, Blair and Jason enthusiastically helped the men bring the injured man inside. Actually, Officer Emmett had wanted to leave with Kevin, but she figured that it was her duty to offer assistance to the injured man. And on top of that, she was still seeing Blair. If she left with Kevin, how would that make her fiancé look? That Kevin is a real good-for-nothing. How could he refuse to give a ride to an injured man? Blair said angrily as he looked at the man's leg. The guy's pants had a huge rent stain. "Don't worry about him," Jason said. Then he turned to the driver and ordered him, "Close the door quickly." Once the door was closed, Jason turned to the men and said, "You guys are lucky you ran into us, otherwise you'd be in trouble." Thank you very much," the man replied with a cold smile. Then he pulled a very sharp knife out of his jacket and said menacingly, "Nobody move. I know how to use this and I'd hate to have to hurt you." "What the hell are you doing?" Blair was dumbstruck. The others didn't know what was going on. "What are we doing? Let me explain. This is a robbery," the man with the injured leg said as he pulled out a knife and held it to Blair's neck. "Don't move, if you value your life." "What are you doing? We were trying to help you," Officer Emmett said in disbelief. "I've already thanked you for that," the injured man said with a cold smile. "But my friends and I need some money. As long as you follow our instructions and hand over all the money you have, I guarantee that you'll all be just fine." "Screw you!" Jason shouted loudly. "Is this how you treat people who try to help you?" Just as Jason finished speaking, one of the other men slapped his mouth and put a knife against his neck too. "Are you a little slow? My uncle wasn't injured at all. There's no need for you to save him," the man said rudely. "But you have been a great help. You know, if the two of you hadn't insisted on letting us in, our plan wouldn't have succeeded." When he said that, Blair, Jason, and the others started to panic. They led such pampered lives, how could they have predicted something like this? "Now do as we say and hand over your money," the man they kept calling their uncle said impatiently. "I don't want to have to say it again. My patience is wearing thin." Now Blair and the others understood why Kevin had reacted the way he did. He could see that there was something wrong with these guys, but he hadn't explained it to them. The funny thing was that Jason and Blair thought they were doing a good deed, but they didn't know that they were being tricked. Officer Emmett decided to take action. She said to the men, "You're real scum. I'm Lieutenant Emmett of the Chicago Police Department. If you know what's good for you, you'll drop your knives and surrender. Ooh, Lieutenant Emmett of the Chicago PD, the man said sarcastically. I'm really scared. Wow, you almost frightened me to death. Officer Emmett was about to say something else when the thief interrupted her and viciously replied, I don't give a shit who you are. She gritted her teeth but didn't say anything more. She was skilled enough to beat these guys all by herself, but the space was really small and pretty crowded. What if she ended up injuring someone by accident? All you have to do is hand over your cash, and I'll spare your lives, the man snarled. One of the other men took out a black bag and held it out to them. You're not getting anything from us, Blair said angrily. He was furious. He'd already disappointed Officer Emmett by having someone disguise himself as a cougar so he could act like he was saving everyone. That's why he'd fought with Kevin just now. He wanted his fiancée to see that he was actually very compassionate, but how could he have known that this group of men were planning to rob them? Unfortunately, the man wasn't in the mood to listen to Blair and gave him a powerful blow to the gut. The intense pain made Blair double over. Will you shut up now, you wimp? The man said disdainfully. If you say another word, I'll cut out your tongue. They were all so shocked to hear these threats. Everyone began to wish they'd gotten out and taken a walk with Phoebe and the others. Listen, if all you want is money, that's okay, but we don't do a lot of cash business. We don't have much on us right now, Jason tried to explain. Are you kidding me? One of the robbers said callously. Then he kneed Jason in the stomach and shoved him against the window, causing it to crack. Jason's face suddenly turned pale. Don't do it, one of the men suddenly shouted. He hadn't said anything until now, but he looked like he was the leader of the gang. I know you're all very wealthy. Otherwise, we wouldn't have deliberately waited here for you, the man went on. So if you don't have any cash, we'll just take everything else. Put all your phones, jewelry, watches, and other valuables in the bag. The man suddenly paused. His gaze swept across everyone's faces before he continued. I'll bet you don't wear any cheap knockoffs, am I right? Suddenly the man stepped on Jason's wrist, making him cry out in pain. Were you trying to hide this? The man growled as he snatched a very glitzy watch from Jason's wrist. This really upset Jason. His watch was a rose gold Chopard worth at least $400,000, and he loved to flash it around. Jason wanted so much to grab it back from the man, but he just didn't have the strength. Could this day get any worse? After Kevin, Lily, and their friends got out of the limo, Jason let the group of men get in so they could drive them to the hospital, but it turned out they didn't need help at all. They were robbers. The gang's leader ripped Jason's watch right off his wrist. That's what I expected from a rich kid like you. I'll bet this watch is worth a few $100,000, the man said happily. As soon as he said this, the man who was holding the bag suddenly got very excited. Quick, hand it over to me. The group of robbers were very happy. It looked like they could get at least $1 million from their rich victims. With that much money, it would be easy to change their identities and move to another town. It's best if you hand your things over willingly. Don't force us to search you, okay? If you resist, things could get a lot worse, the group's leader said coldly. Officer Emmett felt horrible about this, but she couldn't figure out how Kevin could stand up to bank robbers but not get involved in this situation. But she couldn't dwell on that right now. Blair and the rest of them were very reluctant to take off their valuables and put them in the black bag. Finally, the gang leader said again, Thank you for your cooperation. We only have one more request. In 1 minute, you're going to get out of the car and stand outside. What choice did they have? They all got out of the car and split up into 2 rows according to the robbers' instructions. The thieves made them hold their hands on their heads like they were under arrest. Some of the more fearful people in the group started to shake. Then the leader of the gang smiled lewdly and reached out to touch Officer Emmett's face. It looked like he had other things in mind than just a robbery. Get lost, you scum, Officer Emmett said in disgust as she slapped the man's hand away. So, "You'd rather play the martyr," he said. Then he turned around and put his knife on the neck of one of the men from Jason's group. "I know how to handle martyrs. You're a police officer, aren't you? Then you're responsible for the safety of everyone here. If you resist me again, this man dies." The man started to tremble even more when he heard this and felt like he was going to faint. Officer Emmett tightly clenched her fists. With her martial arts skills, dealing with these robbers wouldn't be a problem at all. But now, there were hostages to worry about. Almost subconsciously, Officer Emmett looked over at Blair, but he was too scared to offer any resistance. She was disappointed to see him like that. The leader was very pleased with himself. He reached out to touch Officer Emmett again, but as he extended his hand, someone seized it firmly. "Who the hell are you?" the man roared as he turned his head to see who had grabbed his wrist. "If you're going to rob us, then just do it and move on. Try anything else and you'll regret it," Kevin warned him. After Kevin had left with the others, he asked Dalton to protect Lily, Phoebe, and Miranda so he could run back to the limo. "Do you have a death wish?" the man yelled furiously. Then he slashed at Kevin with his knife. Kevin grunted and gave the man a quick, powerful side kick in the gut, sending him flying 10 feet away. "You guys are the worst robbers I've ever seen," Kevin scoffed. "Kevin, quick, save me," Jason yelled excitedly. He remembered what Kevin had done to Merriweather and he knew that he could rescue them from these robbers. "You should have kept running instead of coming back here to die," the man growled as he got up from the ground. "What are you still standing there for? Hurry up and kill this bastard." The man turned around and shouted at the other robbers. Hearing this, they immediately rushed towards Kevin. "Kevin, be careful," Officer Emmett cried out in alarm. "Don't worry," Kevin replied to her, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he took a step forward towards the men. When the first man threw a punch at Kevin, he deflected it and then punched him in the stomach. The man dropped to his knees, unable to breathe. When the other men saw Kevin take out their best fighter so quickly, they stopped in their tracks. Jason, Blair, and the others also stared in disbelief. Was Kevin really that powerful? "Is he okay?" the second robber asked frantically. Before the man could answer, Kevin kneed him in the chest. "He's just going to take a little nap," Kevin said. After letting out a muffled groan, the man lay down on the ground and didn't move at all. "Shut the hell up!" the second man screamed as he raised his knife and quickly rushed towards Kevin. Then he slashed at Kevin's head. The strike could have killed him, but in the next second, Kevin grabbed the man by the wrist and kicked him hard in the shin. There was a cracking sound as the bone snapped. Then Kevin quickly reached out his other hand and grabbed him by the waist. He lifted his attacker up and threw him at the other two men. The three of them fell to the ground in a heap. The one who had tried to kill Kevin lay on the ground holding his broken legs, screaming in agony. After seeing the four armed robbers fall to the ground so quickly, Blair jumped up in excitement and shouted, "What a beautiful fight!" The hostages smiled as they saw a glimmer of hope. A couple even started to cheer Kevin on, but their hopes were dashed when they heard a gunshot suddenly ring out. The head of the gang had shot out one of the windows of the limo. "Why don't you try that with me, you son of a bitch?" The man snarled ferociously as he pointed his gun at Kevin. Hey, I didn't know you were carrying any guns with you," Kevin replied without flinching. Instead, he said calmly, "Why don't you try to shoot me instead of an innocent car? Let's see if you can hit me." "Are you actually daring me to shoot you?" he asked contemptuously. "Do you want to try?" Kevin asked jokingly as he furrowed his brow. "Kevin!" Officer Emmett shouted anxiously when she heard him say this. Of course she saw through Kevin's strategy. It was the same thing he'd done during the bank robbery. He was trying to draw the man away so he wouldn't hurt the others. Kevin was very casual about it. He waved at Officer Emmett and then said to the gang slater, "If you don't shoot me now, you may not get another chance." "Go to hell!" the man shouted as he pulled the trigger. As the gunshot rang out, blood burst from Kevin's shoulder. Fortunately, it wasn't in a vital organ. Kevin grunted and his face turned pale. "Go to hell!" the man yelled again, He didn't want Kevin to get off so easily. Just as he was about to fire a second time, Dalton showed up and grabbed the man's arm forcefully. Then he gave him a solid punch to the head. The man dropped immediately to the ground unconscious. "Kevin!" Lily and Phoebe exclaimed almost at the same time as they quickly ran over to him. "Are you okay?" Dalton called out in concern, but then he saw the other two men getting up off the ground. "You deserve to die!" Dalton shouted as he clenched his fist and ran toward the two men. He knocked them both out in two swings. Just then, the one whose leg Kevin had broken pulled the pistol out of his pocket. Perhaps it was because he was in such pain from his broken leg, but he wasn't able to steady the gun when he fired it, and he ended up shooting Kevin in the back. "Damn it!" Dalton shouted when he saw this. He ran over to the man and kicked the gun out of his hand. Then he knocked him out cold. That's when Kevin fell to the ground. While he was unconscious, Kevin felt like he was having a long dream. When he woke up, he found himself in a hospital. "Kevin, you finally woke up," Lily said excitedly as she grabbed his right hand. She had been at his bedside all night. "How long have I been unconscious?" Kevin asked. His face still looked very pale. "You've been here for a day and night," Lily sobbed. During the whole time, Lily had been afraid that Kevin would never wake up. "Kevin, promise me one thing. In the future, if we ever get in the same situation again, don't be so brave, okay? The doctor said the bullet struck close to your heart. Less than 2 inches away." Lily's voice became softer and softer as she spoke. Her eyes were red from all her crying. "Lily, please don't cry. If you cry, you'll just make me sad," Kevin said with a bitter smile. He knew that he had to do what he did to keep the others from being hurt. "I don't care. You must promise me. If something happened to you, I don't know what I'd do," Lily said shyly. Hearing this made Kevin happy. "Okay, I promise," Kevin said as he forced a smile. "I'm sorry I scared you." After a moment he said, "Let me give you a kiss." "I don't want to," Lily said as she immediately stopped crying and took a step back from the hospital bed. Kevin shook his head in confusion. Then he looked around the room and asked her, "Lily, where are we? I didn't know hospitals around here were so luxurious." "This is a private hospital opened by the Steele family. Speaking of which, you really have to thank Dalton Steele. If he hadn't invited the best doctor, your surgery wouldn't have gone so smoothly," Lily told him. She was still afraid he wouldn't survive the shooting. "Where's Dalton now?" Kevin asked. Of course, Dalton hadn't forgotten him, but he had some preparations to take care of. "It's his grandfather's birthday in 2 days," Lily explained. "Dalton is busy taking care of the guests in his home. He also said that when you wake up, I should give him a call." As Lily spoke, she took out her phone. Kevin looked up at the ceiling. Even though he'd just been critically injured, he was grateful to have made a friend like Dalton. After Lily finished the call, Kevin asked her, "Do you know where Dalton's home is?" "Why? Do you want to go over there?" "I think you need to recover from your injuries." "Anyway, he just said that he'd be right over," Lily said worriedly. While this was going on, Mitchell Cook, Adriana Wright, and the other 3 were sitting together in a private room in the Whistler Hotel. They were discussing their plans for an ecological garden. They were interrupted by the crash of the room's door being kicked open. Thomas Williams, Kevin's uncle, looked at them with a furious expression in his eyes. "Who the hell are you? Get out of here immediately!" Cook shouted fiercely. "Who do you think you are? How dare you yell at me?" Thomas Williams growled at him. "You're just Kevin's flunkies. What are you doing eating in such a nice hotel?" Mitchell was irritated to hear him talking like this. "Who the hell are you? How dare you behave so shamefully in my hotel?" "My name is Thomas Williams," he said proudly. "If Kevin were here, he'd have to answer to me. That gives you an idea of my importance." Adrian and the others looked at each other in disbelief when they heard him say this. They knew right away who he was. "So what if you're from the Williams family? This is Chicago, not New York. You're a long way from home," Emo Squire said seriously. "Is that supposed to be a warning?" Thomas said gravely. "Take them all the way. Let's see how long Kevin survives without his buddies. They had no idea what Thomas had in mind. Kevin's uncle Thomas burst into the meeting at the Whistler Hotel and ordered his men to take Cook, Adriana, and the others hostage. He was trying to weaken Kevin's position by removing his friends from the equation. "What right do you have to do this to us?" Gilbert said as he struggled against the grip that one of Thomas's bodyguards had put on him. "And what right do you have to help Kevin?" Thomas snarled. "You don't know what's good for you, and you've been siding with Kevin against the entire Williams family. Now Grandpa's given me the order for me to come here to Chicago to handle this. I'll take you all back to New York as our guests." "Grandpa Williams? You mean Randall Williams?" Cook asked in surprise. How could anyone not know who Randall Williams was? The Williams family was the most wealthy family and powerful one in New York, and Randall was the pillar of the family. However, he hadn't been seen in public in years. Thomas didn't want to waste any more time with Mitchell Cook. He told his men, "Take him away." Then he turned around and walked towards the door. When he got to the main hall, Drake saw Thomas walking towards him. "Who the hell are you? What are you doing here?" Drake asked when he saw Cook and the others being held against their will. "Take care of them," Thomas said. He didn't even look at Drake as he continued to walk out of the hotel. Just when Drake was about to lose his temper and stop Thomas, he felt someone touch his shoulder. "Who are you?" Drake roared impatiently. He saw a man standing menacingly in front of him. The man quickly struck Drake in the chest with the palm of his hand, sending him flying and crashing into several tables. Drake was in intense pain from the blow. He got up from the floor and shouted at his bodyguards, "Kill him!" "You overestimate yourself," the man replied ominously. Before the men could respond to Drake's order, the man leapt into the middle of them. In a few quick moves, he knocked them all to the floor. Thomas suddenly stopped in the doorway. He turned around, looked Drake in the eyes, and said, "I'll spare your life. Go and tell Kevin that if he cares about these people's lives, he should go back to New York City alone. I'll wait for him in the main hall of the Williams mansion." Then Thomas waved his hand at his guard. The man understood what he meant. He quickly went up to Drake and knocked him out with a single punch. When the onlookers saw this, they immediately started whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was going on. Who the hell are these people? Did that guy just hit Drake? They wondered. They were too frightened to do anything but watch. After Thomas left with his men, the Whistler hotel staff checked Drake to see if he was okay while one of them called an ambulance. They knew very well that anyone who could take Cook and Adriana away like that was someone they didn't want to mess with. While all this was going on, Dalton Steele was just arriving at the hospital. When he saw Kevin sitting up in his bed, he smiled broadly. "Hey, Kevin, I knew you'd pull through, and you were right about everything," Dalton said happily. "I hope I can get out of here soon," Kevin said dejectedly. "You're lucky you're not dead," Dalton said with great concern. Kevin didn't want to argue with him about this. Then he asked, "Do you have a lot of guests to take care of? What are you doing here with me?" "Those people don't need my help with anything. Besides, I'd rather be here cheering you up," Dalton said candidly. Kevin was a little irked when he heard Dalton say this, and he was tempted to turn away from him. "Hey, I don't need any help, and I don't need any cheering up," Kevin said irritably. "Hey, it's not the same thing," Dalton said as he scratched his head. Before Kevin could answer, Dalton said, "My grandfather, Norman Steele, asked me to invite you to come over to our house." Lily looked at Dalton in shock. She couldn't believe what she just heard. The Steele family was very important in the Chicago region, and even though Norman Steele had long since retired from business, he still had a lot of clout. Lily knew that Kevin could really move up in the world if he impressed the man. "For your grandfather's birthday? Of course I'll go," Kevin said with a smile. "That's great. I'm happy to see you're doing better. By the way, my family actually owns this hospital. If you need anything at all, don't be afraid to ask. They'll take care of you," Dalton said as he patted Kevin on the shoulder. Then he added, "Let's have a drink after you get out of here." "Are you leaving already?" Kevin teased Dalton. "What am I, chopped liver?" "Come on, Kevin. Who said I'm leaving?" Dalton replied calmly. "By the way, when you recover from your injuries, I have something very important to tell you." I've got big plans for us, brother. Why can't you tell me now? This is a private room after all, Kevin urged him. Okay, why not? Dalton said as he walked to the door and looked around. After making sure that there was no one within earshot, he closed the door and went back to sit down next to Kevin's hospital bed. On the 23rd of this month, there will be an important competition, an entrance exam. If you pass it, you can enter the Advanced Herbal Medicine program at the Chicago School for the Natural Healing Arts, Dalton said in a low voice. From what I heard, they only have 15 slots, but anyone can take the exam. What does this have to do with me? It's not like I'm planning to go there, Kevin asked hesitantly. I thought you just might be interested. You know how everyone's trying to find herbal and natural ways to improve their strength and sharpness. Anyone who finishes this program is guaranteed to be very successful, Dalton explained. Then he added excitedly, if you do really well there, the sky's the limit. Don't tell me you don't think you're already a success, Kevin said as he gave Dalton a puzzled look. Although they hadn't known each other for a long time, Dalton didn't strike Kevin as being greedy. Who said I don't feel like a success? But Kevin, you have no idea how important this is. It could really give your career a boost, Dalton said enthusiastically. They have some of the best teachers in the world, real experts, Dalton continued. Then he put his hand on Kevin's shoulder and said, I saw what you did to help my wife. Just from what you learned on your own, imagine what you could do with the right guidance. Lily had been sitting patiently on the armchair in the corner, and she had no idea what the two of them were talking about. Okay, Dalton, let's talk about this later. I think we must be boring the heck out of Lily right now, Kevin said as he turned to look at his wife. Okay. The exam's not for another 10 days anyway, Dalton agreed. Most people had no idea any of this was going on and just took the regular vitamins and minerals that their doctors gave them. But what Dalton was talking about was on another level altogether. Kevin, why don't you just get out of that bed? I've got nothing going on right now. Come on over to my house and we'll sit down and talk. Dalton invited him warmly. No problem, Kevin answered as he lifted his blanket. Are you really okay? Lily asked worriedly. I'm fine, Lily. You know how tough I am. I mean, I was only shot twice, Kevin boasted. If you don't believe me, we can try to consummate our marriage tonight. Don't embarrass me, Kevin, Lily said shyly. Kevin smiled and slowly got out of bed with some help from Dalton. The three of them left the hospital together and Dalton drove straight to the Steele family's mansion. On the way, Kevin sent Miss Wilson a message asking her to have some gifts sent over. After all, this was the first time he was going to Dalton's house, and he was even going to meet his grandfather, the famous Norman Steele. How could he possibly go there empty-handed? About an hour later, the three of them pulled up in front of the mansion and walked inside. Norman Steele was sitting at the head of the table, chatting happily with the guests who had come to see him. Among the many guests, Kevin spotted an acquaintance. It was Tucker, whom he had recently seen at his class reunion. Kevin, come over here and let me introduce you. This is my grandfather, Norman Steele, Dalton said eagerly. Grandpa, this is my friend Kevin. Norman smiled and nodded at Kevin. It's nice to meet one of my grandson's friends. Have a seat and enjoy yourself. Thank you, sir, Kevin said politely. After that, he took Lily over to introduce her to Tucker. Hey, Tucker, I didn't expect to meet you here. And I didn't expect to see the Jones family's infamous lazy son-in-law, Tucker replied coldly. A few of the guests heard this and started to whisper to each other. They'd heard about Kevin from the rumors Jason had been spreading around town. The way he was dressed didn't help make a good first impression either. Dalton pretended not to hear what they were saying. He walked over to Kevin and Tucker and asked with a smile, Are you two friends? Before Kevin could say anything, Tucker answered first. You must be joking. Who would be friends with trash like him? After saying that, Tucker took a long look at Dalton and then glanced over at Lily. Actually, Tucker was mainly there for two reasons. The first was to help his sister give Norman Steele a gift so that she could make a connection with the family and get a job in one of their companies. Second, he wanted to make friends with Dalton. After all, he was a well-known figure in Chicago. Tucker thought that if he could become friends with him, it would help him to get ahead. However, Tucker had never thought that he would run into Kevin at a Steele family party. "Please forgive me, Mr. Steele. I have to excuse myself." After saying this, Tucker turned around and left, as if he didn't want anyone to know that he had some kind of relationship with Kevin. "Who was that, Kevin?" Lily asked as Tucker walked away. "No one. He's just a mixed-up guy I know from school," Kevin replied faintly. Tucker immediately stopped when he heard him say that. He turned his head to look at Kevin and said loudly, "What did you just say, scumbag? You're nobody. How dare you say something like that about me?" "I can say anything I want, loudmouth," Kevin said contemptuously. This was upsetting for Kevin. He hadn't provoked Tucker, but here the guy was trying to embarrass him in front of everybody. So Kevin figured he didn't have to be nice to him anymore. "You're a nobody," Tucker snarled. "You wouldn't even be here today if you hadn't married into the Jones family." Then Tucker sneered and said, "Haven't you come here with your wife to give Mr. Steele a gift?" "Oh, really? Aren't you also here to give the gentleman a gift?" Kevin laughed mockingly. "I haven't heard about you making a name for yourself lately. How can you afford to get Mr. Steele a decent present?" "I'm here to offer my sister's gift on her behalf," Tucker said proudly. "Your sister? So then the gift really isn't from you," Kevin said with a sneer. The people around them immediately reacted to this. How could Tucker be showing off like this when he hadn't even brought his own gift for Grandpa Steele? This got Tucker even angrier. "So what's it to you? You're such a jerk that you don't even deserve to know her name." "What? You really don't think I know who your sister is?" Kevin asked in a mocking tone. After all, he knew just about everybody at his old school. But Kevin had an even bigger surprise in store for Tucker.